developmental optometrist, award-winning author, and international speaker, Dr. Lynn Hellerstein holds powerful and inspiring conversations with her guests on Vision Beyond Sight in areas of healthcare, wellness, education, sports, and psychology. They share their inspirational stories of healing and life transformation through their vision expansion. Billions of people have vision problems, and vision is more than 20/20. Vision Beyond Sight will help you see with clarity and gain courage and confidence. Your vision does not define you. You define your vision. With Dr. Lynn's new way to look at your life through a new lens, you will be ready to meet yourself and receive visualizations for miracles to come. Welcome to Vision Beyond Sight.
Hi friends, this is Dr. Lynn and welcome to Vision Beyond Sight. Today visiting with us is Glenn Sturm, best-selling author, astrophotographer, and much more. And today we're going to talk about his 17 plus years of fighting cancer. Let's learn a little bit more about Glenn first. Glenn received his JD from the University of Florida in 1985. And he's had many, many careers since then, including teaching corporate finance and decision-making. He served as an officer in the U.S. Army, both on active duty and reserves for over 35 years. He authored the book, Warriors Hate War, Strategy, Politicization. You could say that for me, Glenn. Successes and failures of the American military. He's held a number of positions at law firms as a bank regulator, financial technology lawyer, founder of internet banking, and just so much more. And with all of these amazing accomplishments, like at least 5 very successful careers, what is so interesting is he did all of this while being diagnosed with incurable cancer in 2012. So he's truly more than a cancer survivor. And now as he's in his 18th year of continuous chemo with over 6,300 days of oral chemo and over 530 days of IV chemo, he's the author of the best-selling book, Cancer Set Me Free, Turning Crisis into Calm to Survive Anything. And his newest book, More Than Hope, the compelling promise of fully integrated multidisciplinary cancer care teams, will be released, and maybe it's already released, but it's going to be released.
No, we're about 2 weeks away.
I knew it was real soon, so that's great. And in his spare free time, he's a photographic artist. He's traveled the world, published 2 books on solar eclipses, and I got to say, I checked out your website and saw some of your gorgeous pictures of the eclipses and nature. And so I urge all of our listeners to check out your website and look at all of your books. But anyways, welcome to Vision Beyond Sight, Glenn.
Well, thank you so much for having me today.
My pleasure, certainly. So you've lived a very multifaceted life as a lawyer, a vet, entrepreneur, and artist. What personal value or principle has remained constant across all of those roles?
There are a couple of things. First, we have a family motto that I try to live by, and that is Sturms never quit. Don't know how to quit. And that, goes back to my dad, my mom. My dad was, my dad's in the Infantry Hall of Fame at Fort Benning. He was a 18-year-old commissioned officer during World War II and stayed in the military for an entire career, taking a break to go to college and then get called back for the Korean War. But he was just a leader who set the example with his own behavior. It's having him teach me, those types of things and right and wrong and the responsibilities of being a leader was probably the first thing. The second thing was my mom was just so creative. She was a colonel's wife, if that makes sense, but and I've got a funny story about that. But she just always tried to encourage me to pursue my passion about anything. And so the one thing I since cancer's happened, I've said I won't let cancer define me. That's one thing. The second big thing is we must all give up hope for a better yesterday. I can't change history, but I can change the future. And so, that's what I try to do every day. And one other thing is I try to put a smile on somebody's face every day.
Yeah. So the big question when you're enduring all this chemo and lots of doctors' visits and all, how do you keep that smile on your own face, much less looking at others to share?
Oh, well, you have to learn how to laugh.
Yeah.
That's the best way to say it. I, yeah, last year was probably the hardest year of the entire battle. I ended up having to have spine surgery that was not quickly diagnosed what the problem was. Uh, but even during that, I took advantage of the time where I could sit down and it would be painful, but I was able to write. And so I wrote 2 books at one time. And, so sometimes I'd sit down for 12 hours. It was hard to walk, but it was not hard just to sit and write and compose.
Yeah. And was that an Eclipse book and your newest book, More Than Hope? Is that what you were writing then?
Well, no, ma'am. The first thing that started out was I've got a 6 book novel series that starts out with the Green Murphy Secession. It's 2 young men. They're both 18. One's a kid from the Diamond District in New York City, and the other's a kid from the farmland, ranchland in Idaho. The kid from New York is not Orthodox Jewish, but highly religious Jewish, and is married at 18. And his best friend he meets in flight training is from Idaho. And they've got 2 extraordinarily powerful women in it. At one point, his wife turns into a Mossad agent, the kid from New York, and the guy from Idaho ends up marrying the richest woman in the United States.
Hmm.
Both parents died, and so it's got a lot of twists and turns in it. And it's it was a lot of fun to write doing the historical research to make sure I got everything right about it. So last year, sitting in the chair a lot, I was able to do that. But I'm back to being mobile again and getting ready for the eclipse on August 12th in Spain.
So you already have your tickets ready to go.
Well, I haven't got the tickets yet because my daughter called me up the other day and said, "Dad, the tickets to Madrid are now 60,000 points on Delta." I said, "Okay, we're not going to buy anything this week. We may get your tickets, this week. Yours, my son-in-law, and my grandsons." I couldn't believe it. It was the cheapest thing I ever heard going to Europe. But it's a lot of fun. And one of the things about it is occasionally people say, "How do you do what you do?" And my answer is, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand the question. I just do, if that makes sense. I don't let cancer define me. I jokingly say I leave cancer in New Haven, Connecticut at Smilo Cancer Center at Yale, who's done a wonderful job of treating me for these, since 2009. But I just do things and I work hard at them and try to excel at whatever I do. There's always room for improvement in everything you do. And then what happened last year because of the problem I had where they missed a tumor on my spine, a local hospital did on an MRI. Um, I learned about multidisciplinary cancer care treatment and how that is fundamentally changing the world for cancer care. The statistics on it are unbelievable. This type of treatment started in Australia about 30 years ago and went to Europe 25 years ago. And it's just now being widely adopted in the United States. But almost nobody in the United States knows what it is.
Yeah, when
So,
you explain, what that.
well, what happens is that you have a team that works for you. And instead of a single doctor doing it, and maybe you see somebody else occasionally, there's a team of integrated medical providers. And so you've got a principal oncologist and you've got other doctors. And just to go through, a kind of a list of those people, you've got a medical oncologist, probably a psychiatrist, and there are reasons for that, a surgical oncologist, a neurologist, a radiation oncologist, a pathologist, a radiologist, a hematologist, just a dentist because of adrenal gland issues, and an ocular oncologist. That's just the doctors, but the whole team could consist of up to 50 people. And what they do is they work together to try to figure out the best ways to treat you. When I was a lawyer doing big deals, I had sometimes like 30 to 50 lawyers working for me on a transaction. And I would have, tax lawyers, environmental lawyers, litigators, securities lawyers. That's what I did primarily, but just all sorts of experts working on it and addressing everything from various angles. Well, when you look at a problem to solve a problem, a lot of people think things are black and white, and they're not. I say they're like a ball, and you look at the ball from all sides, and you try to get the perspective from everybody. And people with different experiences are going to see different things. And once you finish that ball on the outside, you got to go through the ear hole and look out, because even though the ball is red on the outside, it's black on the inside. And so you're looking for every type of perspective on it. And the results of this kind of analysis are stunning. And the thing that's kind of unique about my situation was I ended up putting my own team together, not even hearing about this, because I was so used to having a team and everything we did. And so, I mean, if you look at the stats on this, though, the lowest amount of reduction in mortality rates for people who use this kind of a team, and it's different for every type of cancer, is 14% reduction. The highest reduction in mortality rates for cancers, including mine, is 90%.
Wow.
So you may not get rid of cancer, you may still have it, but your survival risks go up dramatically. And what everybody wants to avoid is the death issue. And so, I mean, there's the statistics on this, I can go on and on about them, but it started out with a Williams-Thompson study where they studied 53,000, I think 187 patients in 37 or 39 major studies. And the absolute conclusion was that if you use a multidisciplinary team, that the risk of death goes down, survival rates go up. And, whether it's the 14% on the low side or the 90% on the high side, people are happy about it because, for instance, in breast cancer in these areas, you're looking at a change in the mortality rates being reduced by 14%, and the disease-free survival for 5 years goes from 41.7% to 56.8%.
That's
Well,
significant.
it is. It's a huge number, and nobody knows about it. So the blessing of having that problem last year for me was I was able to research this very extensively and then write a book. And the book has got the base book tells the story about what I went through, and the 5 times I had major warnings and what came from it. But then it has 7 extensive memos on it. One is who's on a team.
Yeah.
Okay, what do you do if your providers don't have a team? The impact of long-term survival rates because of high quality of life, which is one of the most interesting things. It's almost linear, but it's not, but it's almost. I mean, so if you have a 10% increase in your quality of life and the matrices that they use, there's almost a 10% increase in the life expectancy. So how do you go ahead?
Go ahead and finish, then I have a question for you.
So it makes you wonder what do you do to have a higher quality of life, and who focuses on that?
Well, that's the big question. And because you've worked in teams, you know the importance how to gather teams. Many people don't have that experience. And if you live in certain areas of this country or the world, you may have a specialist in one area, but you can't find a specialist in another area. Were you able to put a team together, an integrated team in where you lived, or how did you manage your
Well,
team care of, since it wasn't ready
well,
made?
my principal oncologist was at Yale. I got her through a friend who was a CEO of the American Cancer Society, no, chief scientist of American Cancer. And it started that way. And then there are some things that are just accidents. I mean, I had a dog die, my mentor died, I got served with divorce papers, and my internist said, "You need to talk to a psychiatrist."
Hmm.
Well, that was critical because when it comes to cancer fatigue syndrome issues, if they are very severe, it may not be related to cancer, which mine wasn't. And you're able to get medication that helps that. And so I had that the second one. Then I had a really bad bike accident. I was unconscious for 45 minutes and broke a bunch of bones. So I had to have a physical therapist. And every week, she was with me 4 to 5 days a week for almost 9 years. And every week, she would take pictures where my cancer presents itself and send those along with a note to my principal oncologist. So right there, you've got a team that communicates.
Yeah, that's a
And
big missing.
yeah, and so then I ended up having to have there was a liver failure issue that was brought about that I've had to figure out because they put me on the liver transplant list because they couldn't figure it out. And I, developed a correlation coefficient model that looked at all the changes in my life and tried to correlate those to the changes in the liver function, which came out of nowhere. And we found out it was a medication. At least I came back and told the folks at Yale it was the correlation coefficient was 0.96, which is almost almost perfect correlation. And they said, "Well, Glenn, that correlation doesn't equal causation." And I said, "Well, we're going to find out about that because I'm not taking that medicine again." And 9 weeks later, I was back to normal. And so then I had that problem, and then I had I had an intestinal problem that was a side effect from chemo that I didn't understand what had caused it until about 3 years ago. But what had happened was I ended up being my own navigator. If I'd had a really good navigator, it would have been different. I mean, I would have had somebody I could rely on. And part of that's my fault that I didn't. But I had a team, and the team got bigger and bigger. And I had acupuncturists and had chiropractor and then internist, and then I had 5 detached retinas in my left eye that came about. And it turned out correlation coefficient worked again. It was another chemo agent that caused that, and so I stopped taking it, and I quit having detached retinas. So yeah, I put mine together. So what do you do if you don't have a team, right? If you don't,
And if I could stop you for just a second, you were a major part of this team, not only advocate, researcher, navigator, which it's very hard to do when you're not feeling well, to be your own navigator. Um, and so, to your credit, that's certainly part of the success of the team. But yeah, what do you do? How often do people find a team already made, or is it mainly that
well,
person has to create their
well,
own team?
there are 2 parts to that question. The first part is there are a lot of people say they're doing this now that aren't doing it. Okay, because this whole concept is about patient-centered medicine instead of doctor-centered medicine. And a lot of doctors don't like that process. And the second thing is the insurance companies don't like it. So what you have to do is know what it means. And there's not a technical definition for it yet. And we're working on that to try to maybe get a bill passed to get the definition right. And you got to be careful when you do things like that because it's have far-reaching consequences. But when you look at my book on this topic, it's got QR codes, and one of the QR codes is a fully integrated team, and all the people you might have on it. Well, I think 6 is the right number for me because some of these folks I don't need, but other people may need some of these people that I wouldn't need. Well, that's pretty obvious once you look at it because there are pregnancy issues and uh, you know breast milk issues and all sorts of other things. you need a hospital or a caregiver that has this service and has these people as part of the group. So the first thing you do is, if you get diagnosed, if you're newly diagnosed, and this will, when you, there's a QR code in the book for all these memos, and this is one of them. And it says, what you do is you ask the hospital, do you have a fully integrated cancer care team?
Yeah, great question.
Okay. Okay. And if you don't, how are you going to provide it for me? And if they don't answer the question, you ask the question, where are you going to refer me so I can get it? So, and it's, some people think it's just well, my local hospital does an extraordinarily good job of providing additional services like acupuncture, massage, and things of that nature. But they don't have a multidisciplinary team leader. They don't have a individual who does the tumor research and the new practices. They don't have a tumor registrar. They don't have, just it goes on and on of the administrative jobs that you need to have, because they've got one oncologist. And they're trying to get a radiologist here, which is something I don't think is the best move, because you don't need a radiologist when you're doing something. There are all sorts of radiologists.
Right.
So the people I think you have to have for sure are the team coordinator, the clinical trials coordinator, the research nurse, the tumor registrar, and the cancer data manager. And if possible, which is probably not possible, there's probably only 20 of these in the United States now, is something called a computational oncologist. And they're the ones who can do the math and can do the genetics testing and the genetics and piecing things together at a genetics level and find drug interaction problems, which happen so often with cancer patients. So
how does it work, especially looking at trying to be, you need all those specialists, but you're also interested in like Eastern medicine, complementary, other kinds of things to support. How do you get traditional MD thinking minds to allow that to happen?
Well, that's part of the problem. And I'm going to give you an example of this, exactly what you just said. So you need a palliative care specialist, an acupuncturist, an art therapy care practitioner, an energy worker, which is like Reiki, a guided imagery practitioner, a mind-body therapist, a music therapist, oncology massage, spiritual, and yoga. I mean, how do you get those people? I mean, that's the problem. You've got a lot of doctors who are silo-based and they don't want to change. But the statistics are extraordinary. And they have tested these statistics against, people who operate the silo. And your risk of death is dramatically higher if you're in a silo practice. Now, let me show you the other side of that. So I've got one of the best doctors in the world for my cancer. My daughter was told I had 2.5. I didn't ask, but she was told I had 2.5 years to live when I was diagnosed in my first few meetings. And so recently I went to Mayo Clinic for my, annual physical stuff, the general stuff. And they put me in with the extraordinarily talented people in lymphoma at Mayo. And the one doctor said, she looked at my treatment history. She said, you didn't have this done? I said, no. You didn't have this done? No. Didn't have this done? No. She said, I know your doctor. She's probably the leading physician in the world for what you have, but you didn't go through any of the preliminary processes. You just went in, I said, and nuked it. She said, yeah. I said, well, ma'am, I had 4 spots on my lungs, 3 spots on my spine, or maybe it was vice versa. And I had been misdiagnosed for 10 years. And I said, let's not go halfway. Let's get this done with and get it done with quickly. And guess what? It works. So, in a team environment, how do you respect, the world's best? And it has to be, it has to be consensus. Well, the other thing about the team environment is the recommendations, and in Germany, there's a state that requires this, that the patient is allowed to attend the team meetings where they review the diagnosis and the treatment protocol. Well, you have to be involved. I mean, my doc and I had a great conversation about it, about, going after it hard, so I could survive. And people a lot of times don't have that option. And my doc said a lot of times that one of the reasons I'm alive today is because my persistent research and pushing the envelope. But if you don't know what the options are and you haven't been trained on how to research and do critical decision making, how do you handle this? Well, a lot of doctors don't want you in that meeting. So I was on an airplane going to Mayo 2 weeks ago, and the gentleman sitting next to me was a sort of extremely highly regarded cardiologist who had retired. He has cancer. Well, his hospital was going to have a tumor board on him, which is the predecessor to the multidisciplinary practices, and they refused to let him listen to it.
Oh, geez.
And I looked at him and said, "What?" I said, "The NIH is suggesting that all patients should be invited, and in Germany, there's a state which requires their invitation and requires the doctors to follow the multidisciplinary team requirements." And he just looked at me. I pulled out one of my memos and handed it to him, and he read it. And he said, "Well, that's the reason I'm on this plane today, because I'm going to MD Anderson, which does it this way, and I'll be able to understand it." Well, there's one thing for a guy who's a cardiologist or, extremely well-known worldwide cardiologist to understand cancer. And he's got a better chance of understanding that most lay people do. But, everybody's entitled to understand what they're going through, and everybody's entitled to know what their options are. In my case, my option was to nuke it right away versus going through a 2-year process of seeing if it worked, rather than just going in and trying to nuke it. Well, mine's not curable, but it's containable.
Yeah.
And so after we got the process going, I mean, the first 9 months were pretty rough and the cancer was getting a lot worse. That's when we went on the IV and went on the highest doses of it for a long time. But that let me start dealing with side effects and not survival. And side effects are manageable.
Well, those are tough choices for people. And like you said, they're not often even given the options to know. And then you have a whole nother layer that you just referred to a little bit about. Insurance may or may not cover many of the treatments.
They have to cover it now because it's an accreditation issue now. So you have to offer multidisciplinary or you're not going to be accredited. So now some hospitals don't have these resources. So how do you get them? Well, in my hometown, that laundry list I just went through, the palliative and integrative care people, the hospital provides those because they've gotten donations to help people with cancer in the community here. I don't take advantage of it because I don't want to take anything away from anybody else because I really don't have to have it if it makes sense.
Yeah.
But the people who've got cancer can get all those things. What they don't have is the team looking at the ball, if that makes sense, and have the meetings where the people can have the discussion. And I mean, really good oncologist. She's basically focuses on hematology or blood-based cancers, and she's very talented in that area. But let's say you've got breast cancer here. A friend of mine and his wife asked me, right after I'd gotten back from my spine surgery, to help them identify a place for their daughter who's 25 years old who had metastatic breast cancer, stage 4, and she's 25. And so, I did the research and everything else, and he said, "Glenn, is there anything in California?" So I went in depth on a couple of places, and it turns out, and I've never been to this hospital, don't know anybody with them, but the University of San Francisco breast cancer department, medical school breast cancer department is extraordinary. And they've been doing real multidisciplinary for a while. And you can find out whether they do it. One of the questions you ask is, how often do you have your multidisciplinary meetings? And they may say we have tumor board meetings, tumor multidisciplinary meetings. Well, that's not the same thing, because multidisciplinary is a consensus-driven model, and the tumor boards is an informational-based model about how a doctor is going to treat something. There can be some places that have really good interactions, but it's not a model that's focused on consensus building and patient-centered medicine. And so you've got to ask the questions. And that's probably the most important question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked about and how important it is for you, the patient, to be the advocate as well. And there's certainly a lot of emotional trauma that goes on through that, and getting care for that, and having especially doctors talk to you. And I just listened to a TED talk from a physician who talked about the importance of hope. And so often have I seen and been in situations where, that's all we can do for you. And they don't even talk about hope or other options. And I know you've talked about hope some. What would you like to share with our listeners about that importance?
Well, here's the thing. Once you have a feeling of being in charge, that you understand what the options are, it's fine. The second thing is, and this is so important, I believe the most common side effect for anybody with cancer is cancer fatigue syndrome. And they used to call me Taz and gave me, those Tasmanian little, toys and stuff at work, because they said I had the attention span of an adolescent fruit fly. But high energy, driven, and everything else. Well, I'm in chemo initially, and I was taking 3-hour naps at work. I mean, that doesn't work. And so once we solved that issue, there was nothing stopping me. Well, how many people have folks address that issue? The historic common answer to that is get a little bit more exercise and get more rest. That does nothing to address the underlying issue. And there are some controversial things out there that I agree with, that says what I just said, that it doesn't help. So you got to get people who will address the issue and know that it's a big issue. So if you say you're tired all the time and nauseous all the time, my first question is, has a nurse given you a Queasy drop yet? And what's that? They're basically ginger drops. And I don't take anti-nausea medicine anymore, because those ginger drops that I take eliminate the nausea. Well, so if you eliminate nausea and you have your energy back, and you can play with your children or your grandchildren, and you can go on a hike, maybe not as long as you used to, but you can still go on a real hike, or ride a bike, or go on a trip with your spouse and go see something you've always wanted to see. It changes things. And that will give you hope, but you've got to have a process of addressing those issues that stand in the way of the quality of life. I mean, think about all the people the people who are getting older or whatever. The ones who seem to live the longest are the ones who are having fun.
And I should live forever.
Well, that's the point. I mean, you probably, well, with the new stuff, I mean, I'm having a pretty good time, as you can probably tell. But when I did with the multidisciplinary approach, I looked at the survival rates for me and where I am. And again, my daughter, I didn't ask because I didn't want to know, because I just wanted to assume I was going to live forever. But I wasn't going to change how I did things. My daughter was told 2.5 years. When I ran it recently, it says a 30-year survival rate for me now.
Wow.
Okay.
Great.
Yes, multidisciplinary, and the benefits of the multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah.
And if you go on your computers and just type in multidisciplinary and the cancer you may have, who provides true multidisciplinary cancer care, things will pop up, and you'll start educating yourself, and you'll find out that your doctor may not be the wizard you think he is. They may be they're all very smart, but if they don't want, let me jump off this for a second, go back for a second. I believe in conflict of ideas without conflict of personalities. You have to have that environment where you want conflict of ideas. You want people to throw out ideas. There's recently in the Department of Defense, there's a young man who saw one of the old military planes we had and decided that they had modified the plane. They were getting ready to retire them all because they couldn't use a bunch of the racks and the external pods on the aircraft. And he looked at it and said, we can put hypersonic missiles on this thing. And guess what? They did. And so it cost, let's say, $100,000 for a big plane. But as opposed to $100 million to build one, they modified it. Well, that didn't come from the top down. It came from the bottom up.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And if you've got an environment that promotes people to have ideas, it works. I mean, one of the most talented people I've ever met in my life was a guy named Steve, and he was head of Coke in Japan. They introduced 40 some products a year when he was there. And they fully staffed everything, fully worked them up, all thought they would work. And some of them they killed in 2 weeks. But there was never a lack of diligence and looking at all alternatives. Okay, but they ended up with Coke being either the biggest coffee or tea maker in the world as a result of that work and other products. And it was just having an open dialogue where ideas were always worshipped, but you had to do your homework on them. That's just like multidisciplinary. The other thing you'll find out interesting is multidisciplinary is not just a medical concept. The FBI solves their major crimes using multidisciplinary procedures.
Yeah.
And they're absolute procedures for to ensure that the communication happens. Now, because that was the big worry, is how are we going to make the communication happen so we don't drop it? Well, there are methodologies that if you adopt a multidisciplinary approach, you'll adopt one of these two primary communications methodologies, and they work. Absolutely work. And so, it may increase things in the long term, but people are going to survive longer, and some people are going to get cured quicker by doing it this way. The most interesting statistic in this whole area is when people go into a multidisciplinary meeting and they you go through it and say the meeting, how often do they change the diagnosis or the treatment plan? I mean, and this is stunning to me. At the bottom end of the range is 15%. At the high end of the range is 65%.
Wow, that's interesting.
Okay. And the average is between 35 and 50. Yeah. Okay. So 35 to 50% of the times when you go into one of these meetings that's run properly, they'll either change the diagnosis or change the treatment plan or both. Well, I mean, maybe that's the reason why people are living longer, because they get the diagnosis and treatment plan right.
Well, yeah, if you're not seeing any change, then there's nothing going on with a multidisciplinary team.
Right.
You're fixed under, the first impression and the typical treatment, and nothing changes.
That's it. I mean, it's the reason I'm so passionate about this was I'm lucky in the fact that I created my own team, and as a result, did real well. I mean, and I acknowledge it was luck. It was just the way I did things. And it turns out that nobody in medical had done that way for decades. And now they're doing it, but in Australia and Europe, 30 years and 25 years respectively, they've been doing these things and it works. So why wouldn't we do this? Well, you've got
That's
people
the big
fighting it.
question, right? Yeah, why?
Yeah. 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 Big, insurance companies fighting it. And you've got, doctors not wanting to do it that way. Again, the numbers I gave you from memory, and it's between, let's say 35 and 50%. It's one of those two things that's happened. So can you imagine half the time or a third of the time people are changing diagnosis? And there are charts out there that will show you by type of cancer when this happens, if that makes sense. I mean, you can look to see how effective multidisciplinary is in different areas.
Yeah.
And I apologize. It's a huge deal. And I've written a book on it because it was important for me to help educate everybody, because nobody I've ever met has ever heard of it,
Well,
including
I'm
that
so
part
glad that, that you have written that book, because being in the medical field myself, and I had a lot more experience with people with brain injury, we ran into the same problem. They had to, traumatic brain injury diagnosis, and that was it. And based on symptoms, you might get this care, but not this care. And nobody really spoke together. And the people that really were able to coordinate their care, and it usually took either themselves or a family member, uh,
Yep.
usually did a lot better. And so it's what a gift that you've given to so many people, to be the advocate, to ask the questions, to get more than one opinion. And, what a doctor says, as great as they may be, isn't always the only way, and to question it. And it's okay to question it.
Oh no, the thing is it's, again, conflict of ideas without conflict of personalities.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you want to ask a question, if they're not willing to answer it and talk to you, you need to go someplace else.
Right.
And I mean, that sounds easy to say, because like in my town, I don't think that exists here, but in my town, there's one oncologist. Well, the next closest oncologist is 90 minutes away. And, some people think that's forever. Well, no, it's not. Be passionate about your life. It's
Yeah.
important. And I told you about the bike injury, which resulted in physical therapy. That was my second TBI.
Jeez.
And the reason I had access to some medicine because of some work I do in a research institute. And I had people who were extraordinary do some things for me. And, but for them, who knows whether I regained my acuity. Some people wish I hadn't, but, it's the way it goes. I mean, you just have to have fun with life. And it goes back to something else. And there's something else I would like your listeners to hear. And that is the whole idea of putting a smile on somebody's face every day. If you do that one thing, you make somebody smile or laugh every day, you're going to live longer. You're going to help other people live longer. Your quality of life is going to be better. And you can celebrate life. And so it's something I try to do every day. Yesterday was a very trying day business-wise, because the internet was down in Western Wyoming and Eastern Idaho. And so I was on the phone with American Express about something we were working on. And the lady at the end said what they always say. She said, "What can I do to help you? Anything else I can do to help you?" And I said, "Yeah, you can get the internet to work in Western Wyoming, Eastern Idaho." And she thought I was serious. and because they fix all these crazy problems. And I said, "Ma'am, that's a joke." And she just started laughing. And so I said, "That's a success today." She said, "What's a success?" I said, I can't see you, so I can't see if you got a smile on your face, but I heard you laugh.
Yeah.
And it just made my day. And that sounds so trivial, but it's not. And when you got, there's another piece of this, and that's the caregivers, and that's what I worry about the most, because they can't do a lot of things. Okay, they can make sure you get to the hospital and things like that, but they can't solve the problem. And generally, they've always solved problems for you and for others.
Mhm.
And I mean, I was talking to a woman about this, and she said, "Well, Glenn, how do you do that?" And I said, "Well, your friend, the next time you go to get your nails done, call your friend up who's dealing with her husband's cancer and ask if you could take her to get her nails done."
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a big deal. It's small.
It makes a difference.
It makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And one of my neighbors' wives came to my house and knows that I like flowers. I didn't realize I liked flowers until about a year, 2 years ago. And I come back from the hospital, and there's 3 bouquets of the most beautiful flowers arranged in ways I had never seen in my house.
Wow.
And I was like, I knew who had done it immediately. And I called her up and said, "Thank you." She said, "Oh, Glenn, you do everything for everybody else." And I said, "No, this is special. This is so special to me."
Well, Glenn, I'm
And,
sorry to say, our time's run out, and
oh, wow.
only put a smile on my face. You've touched my heart deeply, and I wish you the best of health and of happiness. And I'm all about fun and laughter. Those are my intentions every day. So
Well, this afternoon afterwards, I get to go. I had spine surgery last year, take to remove that tumor on L3 root nerve. And this afternoon, I get to go hit golf balls again. And
there you
so,
go.
that puts a smile on my face, because yesterday we had snow and rain in Jackson, Wyoming. So today there's sunshine.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. Well, I thank you so much for your time, and truly your words of wisdom, and encourage our listeners to not only get your book, but take a look at your website and see some of those gorgeous pictures of eclipse and wildlife.
okay. I'm going to say one last thing. In my book, there are QR codes for these memos, which means that people will be able to download them and share them. You're not violating my copyright if you share them. And I want people to do that. And send them to your doctor. Ask questions that way.
Yeah. Great tips. And I thank you and wishing you well. And to our listeners, thanks so much for joining us. And we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today on Vision Beyond Sight. Join Dr. Lynn Hellerstein each week to help you find clarity in your functional vision and expand the power of your seeing brain to gain courage, confidence, and success in your life. Remember, your vision does not define you. You define your vision. For more information and find additional podcasts, visit lynnhellerstein.com. See you next time on Vision Beyond Sight.